In a city of glass towers and bustling streets where wealth and power spoke louder than compassion, there lived a man named Daniel Hayes, a janitor in one of the most prestigious corporate skyscrapers in the district, and though his life looked ordinary to the people who passed him by every day, his story was anything but simple. For Daniel was not only a janitor mopping floors and emptying trash bins but also a single father carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, raising his little daughter Emily after the loss of his wife 3 years ago when illness claimed her life and left him with nothing but memories, unpaid hospital bills, and a girl with tear-streaked cheeks asking why mommy never came back. Daniel had once dreamed of a future far different from this. Once upon a time he had been a boy who touched piano keys like they were the very strings of his soul, who studied in late-night classrooms, who believed he might one day play in grand halls with lights shining down on him, but life had other plans that ripped his dreams away when his family fell into hardship and his father demanded he leave school to work. And slowly the piano gathered dust while his calloused hands learned to scrub floors instead of glide across ivory keys, yet inside him the music never died. It lingered like a flame burning faintly beneath ashes, and though no one in his building knew it, the janitor who pushed around carts of cleaning supplies carried within him a gift most had forgotten even existed. Every evening after finishing his shift, Daniel would take Emily to the small rented room they called home, a cramped apartment in a run-down neighborhood where peeling wallpaper told stories of years gone by, and as she lay in bed he would hum melodies he once played on a grand piano. Melodies that lulled her to sleep with a sense of magic her young heart clung to. Emily adored her father more than anything and often told him, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'll buy you the biggest piano in the world, so you can play again," to which Daniel would smile through his tiredness and kiss her forehead, whispering, "As long as I have you, Emily, I already have the biggest gift in the world." One morning the building Daniel worked in buzzed with unusual energy. Whispers of an important gathering filled the hallways, because today the CEO, a stern yet respected man named Richard Whitmore, was hosting an annual corporate celebration in the grand ballroom on the top floor, a place Daniel had only seen from afar when polishing brass railings but never entered. The ballroom was stunning, with a shining black grand piano sitting at its center like a jewel, and to the executives it was merely decoration, an expensive toy meant to impress clients, but to Daniel, even glimpsing it from the doorway felt like catching sight of an old friend. That evening, as employees in suits and gowns filled the room, laughter and clinking glasses echoed while the janitor moved quietly along the edges with his mop and bucket, unseen, unnoticed, like wallpaper blending into the background. A group of young executives, tipsy from champagne, spotted him and began whispering, their voices laced with arrogance, and one of them, a man named Brian, smirked and said loudly, "Hey, what about the janitor? Maybe he can give us a show. Let's see if he can even spell piano," and they all burst out laughing, their cruelty bouncing across the polished walls. At first Daniel ignored them, focusing on his work, but they insisted, clapping their hands and drawing attention from the crowd. "Come on, janitor. Play something for us. Let's see what those mopping hands can do." It was meant to humiliate him, to reduce him to entertainment for their amusement, and Daniel's face burned with quiet shame, but inside his heart trembled with something else, a pull, a longing, a whisper of the boy he used to be. The CEO himself noticed the commotion and, though he normally would have silenced such mockery, he allowed it to play out, curious to see what the janitor would do, for Richard was a man who had built his empire by watching people under pressure and discovering their true character. Slowly, under the weight of countless eyes, Daniel walked toward the piano, his worn shoes tapping lightly against the polished floor, and every step felt like walking back through time, back to the boy who once dreamed, back to the mother who once said, "Your music will touch people's hearts someday," back to the life he lost. His hands trembled as he sat down, the laughter still buzzing behind him, but when his fingers hovered above the keys, silence fell, as if even the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and then, he began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, like a voice breaking after years of silence, but soon they grew stronger, pouring out of him in waves of emotion, melodies so rich and full of sorrow yet hope that every person in that ballroom forgot to laugh. The music told stories without words, of loss and love, of hardship and resilience, of a father who carried his daughter through storms, of nights spent dreaming of what might have been and mornings spent fighting to survive. It was no longer just Daniel playing, it was his soul speaking, and it pierced through every suit, every diamond necklace, every hardened heart in that room. Some executives shifted uncomfortably, realizing how cruel they had been, while others simply stared, mesmerized, unable to comprehend how the janitor's fingers could summon such beauty. Emily's face flashed in Daniel's mind as he played, her smile, her laughter, her tiny arms hugging him tight, and he played for her, for the wife he lost, for the boy he once was. Every note a prayer, every chord a confession, until even Richard Whitmore, the CEO with a reputation as cold as steel, felt tears sting his eyes. When the final note hung in the air like a sigh refusing to fade, the silence that followed was so heavy it felt sacred, as though no one dared to break it. Then, slowly, the applause began, not polite claps but thunderous, heartfelt applause that shook the room, and for the first time in years Daniel stood not as a janitor, not as a man people mocked, but as a musician, an artist, a father who had reminded an entire crowd of the beauty they had forgotten existed in the world. Richard Whitmore stood from his seat, his expression unreadable, and everyone waited, wondering if he would reprimand the executives for their cruelty or praise the janitor for his gift, but before he spoke, Daniel simply bowed his head, tears slipping down his cheeks, and whispered to himself, "For you, Emily." What no one knew yet was that this single performance, born from a cruel joke, would change Daniel's life forever, opening doors he never dared to knock on and touching hearts that wealth and power had long made numb. But in that moment, all he felt was relief, that for once, his music had finally been heard. The applause echoed in Daniel's ears long after the sound faded, as though every beat of his heart carried it forward, and for the first time in years he did not feel invisible, he did not feel like the janitor who slipped unnoticed through polished hallways, but rather like the man he once dreamed of becoming, a man whose music mattered, though as the crowd slowly settled and whispers filled the ballroom, his humility made him want to retreat, to vanish back into the quiet corner where no eyes were on him. But before he could step away, Richard Whitmore, the CEO whose presence alone commanded silence, stood from his seat, his tall frame and sharp suit catching the dim light of the chandelier, and he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of decades of authority. "Mr. Hayes, wasn't it?" Daniel swallowed hard, nodding, his hands still trembling from the emotions he had just unleashed through the piano, and Richard continued, "That was not just music. That was a story. That was life itself." The room, filled with men and women who had laughed moments earlier, now hung on every word, their arrogance replaced with awe, and for once even Brian, the executive who had mocked Daniel, sat frozen in shame. Richard slowly approached the piano, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture so simple yet so powerful it sent a shiver down the janitor's spine. "Tell me," Richard asked, "how did you learn to play like that?" And Daniel, caught between truth and pride, spoke softly, "When I was young, sir. I dreamed of being a pianist, but life had other plans. My father needed me to work, my wife fell ill, and I had to let go of those dreams to provide for my family. The music stayed inside me, but the world had no place for it." His voice cracked slightly, and the ballroom, a place usually filled with corporate chatter and ambition, grew as quiet as a church. Richard's eyes softened, and for a man known for numbers and contracts, something inside him cracked open. He too had once carried dreams left behind, though no one in the room knew it, and in Daniel's story he saw his own buried regrets. After a long silence, Richard turned to the crowd and said firmly, "Ladies and gentlemen, remember this night. Remember that greatness is not measured by titles or wealth, but by what lies within the human spirit. Tonight, our janitor reminded us of something money can never buy: heart." Applause roared again, this time not just for the music but for the truth in his words, and Daniel stood there stunned, overwhelmed, clutching the memory of Emily's smile in his heart like a lifeline. Richard then leaned closer and said quietly, "Bring your daughter tomorrow. I want her to see where her father belongs." Confused but too moved to argue, Daniel simply nodded, his throat too tight to form words. That night, as Daniel walked Emily home from her friend's house, where she had been staying during his late shift, he held her tiny hand tighter than usual, and she noticed the glimmer in his eyes. "Daddy, you're smiling so big," she giggled, her pigtails bouncing. Daniel chuckled, lifting her up into his arms despite his exhaustion, whispering, "Sweetheart, I played the piano tonight." Her eyes widened with wonder. "Really? Like you used to tell me about? Did people listen?" Daniel's voice softened. "Yes, Emily. They listened." He didn't tell her about the tears in the CEO's eyes, or the applause, or the way his soul had poured out through those keys. He saved that for later, wanting her to see it for herself. The next day, dressed in his cleanest shirt and holding Emily's hand, Daniel entered the building not as an invisible janitor but as a guest invited to the top floor, and the receptionist who barely nodded at him before now greeted him warmly, word of the previous night's miracle having already spread through the company like wildfire. Executives who once sneered at him now whispered respectfully as he passed, their shame still heavy, but Daniel kept his eyes on Emily, who looked around in awe at the chandeliers and polished marble she had never seen before. When they reached the CEO's office, Richard himself greeted them, and for Emily, it was like stepping into a fairy tale, meeting a man who seemed larger than life. "You must be Emily," Richard said kindly, kneeling slightly so he could look her in the eye. "Your father is a remarkable man." Emily beamed, hugging Daniel's leg, and whispered proudly, "I told you, Daddy, you're the best." Richard smiled, then turned to Daniel and said, "Mr. Hayes, I won't waste your time. I want to offer you something. Last night showed me that music has power, and you have a gift this company needs, not to clean our floors, but to inspire our people. I want you to work here not as a janitor, but as our corporate pianist, to play at our events, to remind us of what truly matters. And if you're willing, I'll personally fund lessons for your daughter so she can grow up knowing the music her father carried inside him." The room seemed to spin around Daniel. He had expected maybe a pat on the back, perhaps even nothing at all, but this was beyond his wildest hopes. His eyes filled with tears as he glanced at Emily, who nodded eagerly as though urging him to say yes. He whispered, I don't know what to say," and Richard replied simply, "Say yes." And so he did. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel sat at a piano not in secret, not as a man clinging to memories, but as someone recognized for his gift, and Emily sat beside him, her little hands pressing keys clumsily while her father guided her gently. The two of them laughed, the sound of joy mingling with the music, and in that moment Daniel knew he had not just regained a dream, he had passed it on. Weeks turned into months, and the story of the janitor who played the piano spread beyond the walls of the company, reaching newspapers and social media, inspiring countless people who had once given up on their dreams. People wrote letters saying, "Because of you, I picked up my guitar again," or "I finally enrolled in that class I abandoned years ago." Daniel's life transformed, not into riches beyond imagination, but into something greater: dignity, purpose, and the chance to give his daughter the childhood he once dreamed of. Emily began piano lessons, her tiny fingers learning scales with determination, and every time she played, she looked at her father with the same pride he once looked at the great pianists he admired. And every evening, after work, Daniel still tucked her into bed with the same words, "As long as I have you, Emily, I already have the biggest gift in the world," but now those words carried not just hope but proof of miracles. And so, the man once mocked and invisible became a symbol of resilience, of hidden talent, of never letting the flame inside die no matter how cruel life may be. He had been asked to play as a joke, but what he gave that night was no joke at all. It was truth, it was love, it was music that even made a CEO shed tears. And to everyone watching this story unfold, let Daniel's journey be a reminder that no matter where life has placed you, no matter how small or overlooked you may feel, your gifts, your dreams, your light still matter. Don't bury them, don't let the world convince you they're worthless, because one day, when you least expect it, your chance to shine will come, and when it does, let the world hear your song. And if stories like Daniel's touch your heart, if you believe in hope, resilience, and the power of never giving up, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, because every story we share here carries the same truth. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything.